All right, let's talk about it. Let's talk about what happened with TikTok at the Supreme Court this morning. So first, I'm going to say that this is going to be a very long video, and that is because I listened to the entire 2 hours and 40 minutes of oral arguments, and in this video, I'm going to take you inside the courtroom. So if you care about TikTok and you want to know what actually happened, have a seat, pull up a chair. It's going to be a while. Second, I want to make it abundantly clear. No one, no media organization, no person who was inside that courtroom, no person listening to the oral arguments live, even like me, can tell you how the justices are going to rule. Anyone who is telling you that is speculating. The justices, most of the time, do not give away their position on a case. In fact, sometimes they can make you think they're leaning a certain way based on the questions they ask, and then in the end rule the completely opposite way. And third, the TikTok ban will happen in 9 days unless the Supreme Court stops it in some way. It is happening. There is no time frame for when the justices will issue a ruling in the case. It can come at any point in the next 9 days. So let's start there. If the Supreme Court does not step in and does not stop this ban, what is going to happen to TikTok on January 19th? It's gone, as I have reported repeatedly, and as TikTok's lawyers confirmed to the justices.
As I understand it, we go dark. Essentially, the platform shuts down.
What do you mean by shut down, too? Can you just spell that out?
One, the app is not available in the app stores. That's at a minimum. But in addition, what the Act says is that all of the other types of service providers can't provide service either. So essentially, what they're going to say is that, I think, we're not going to be providing the services necessary to have you see it. So it's essentially going to stop operating.
So that begs the question, what about President-elect Trump? Can he step in and save TikTok after he's sworn in 1 day after the ban takes effect? The government acknowledged that would be very dicey.
Could the president say that we're not going to enforce this law?
I think as a general matter, of course, the president has enforcement discretion.
And would that then adequately would that be binding? In other words, protect the regulated community such that they could rely on that under due process principles going forward?
That raises a tricky question. So I think there would be
then it's
a
not
strong.
Going to be adequate.
On the 19th, if it doesn't shut down, there is a violation of law, correct?
Yes.
And whatever the new president does doesn't change that reality for these companies.
That's right.
Okay, so let's talk about the actual arguments the justices are weighing. On one side, whether the law violates the Constitution by infringing on the First Amendment rights of TikTok, the US-based company, and the rights of the 170 million American TikTok users. And on the other side, whether that right should be pushed aside because the government says there is a possibility that TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, which is based in China, could potentially use covert content manipulation, could potentially collect American data, and therefore could be a national security risk. The justices seemed to really take to heart the government's points about national security concerns and data collection concerns. But Justice Gorsuch and Justice Kagan had a lot of problems with the government's arguments and position that the covert content manipulation threats are more important than the First Amendment.
Just because we don't know that China's behind it, that's what covert means? It's just because people don't know that China is pulling the strings, that's what covert means?
What it means is that Americans are on this platform thinking that they are speaking to one another, and this recommendation engine that is apparently so valuable is organically directing their speech to each other. And what is covert is that the PRC, a foreign adversary nation, is instead exploiting a vulnerability in the system.
Well, if that's all it means, that people don't know that China's behind it, everybody now knows that China is behind it.
No, but it's the specific content that's being manipulated would be unapparent. And so I think
that's true of every search engine.
I mean, don't we normally assume that the best remedy for problematic speech is counter speech? And TikTok says it could even live with a disclaimer on its website saying this can be covertly manipulated by China. So you're saying that won't work because?
That won't work because it is such a generic, generalized disclosure that it wouldn't put anyone reasonably on notice about when it's actually happening. And the example I've been thinking about is...
argument is that the average American won't be able to figure out that the cat feed he's getting on TikTok could be manipulated, even though there's a disclosure saying it could be manipulated. Wouldn't that be true for all social media companies, for all content, and every algorithm has preferences, whether it's domestic or foreign? And nobody really knows exactly when those editorial decisions are being made or how, but they're generally aware, and we think that's enough.
I think, though, that there is a real risk that when a foreign adversary has control of that kind of mechanism and a speech platform in the United States, it could weaponize that platform to harm United States interests.
TikTok's lawyer did admit to Justice Kavanaugh that the possibility of TikTok collecting American data and then China somehow getting their hands on it is a valid concern. But he argued that possibility still does not outweigh the First Amendment.
I certainly acknowledge the risk, but I think there are lots of reasons, not just the one I just gave, but there are lots of reasons why that risk still can't justify the law.
But just on the data collection, that seems like a huge concern for the future of the country.
And Your Honor, again, it is a concern, two responses. First, it is a concern that can be addressed directly. The reason why there's no evidence in this record about whether that kind of direct prohibition on TikTok Incorporated from sharing sensitive user data with anybody, including ByteDance, the reason why the record is devoid of any evidence of that is because Congress never considered the other side of the balance. And that's the minimum that Congress has to do under the First Amendment.
The lawyer for the 8 U.S.-based TikTok creators who are suing in this case said that's because data collection is not the real reason why Congress decided to ban TikTok. He argued the real reason was because Congress doesn't like the type of content that appears on TikTok. And how does he know that? Well, he says because other Chinese-based companies that operate in the United States, like Temu and Shein, openly collect U.S. user data and were excluded from this law.
You're really sitting up there and saying Congress would not pass the divestiture law if data security were the only interest.
So I'm saying it would not have passed this divestiture law if data security were the only interest. It's very curious why you just single out TikTok alone and not other companies with tens of millions of people having their own data taken, in the process of engaging with those websites and equally, if not more, available to Chinese control.
But the government sees this very, very differently. They argue that this law is in no way a violation of the First Amendment rights of TikTok or of the 170 million American users because Congress said those people and that company has no First Amendment right to speak on a platform that's owned by an adversary country like China.
Did I understand you to say a few minutes ago that one problem that ByteDance might be through TikTok trying to get Americans to argue with each other?
That it might be just trying to foment
if they do, I say they're winning.
Or dissent. That might very well be true, Mr. Chief Justice. And I think the point I'm trying to make is that China is a foreign adversary nation that looks for every opportunity it has to weaken the United States and to try to threaten our national security. And if it has control over this key communications channel, it's hard to predict ex ante exactly how it's going to use that as a tool to harm our interests. But we know it's going to try, first and foremost, by seeking to get the data of these American users.
In the end, the justices are left with the question I started with at the beginning of this video. Does your First Amendment right and the First Amendment right of TikTok outweigh the government's fear that TikTok, through its Chinese-based parent company, can, through multiple different potential ways, threaten our national security? Here's how TikTok's lawyer left it with the justices.
If mere covertness were the issue, a disclosure would make perfect sense. Yet they're not concerned about mere covertness. They're concerned, as my friend suggested, with getting Americans to argue with each other. Well, as far as I can tell, that's what news organizations do in this country every single day. That's what we call editorial content. That's what we call content itself. And so it's trained directly on the content. Restricting speech has to be the last resort, not the first one.
I'll let you know when the justices issue a ruling.